A new AI safety paper has come out called Frontier AI Regulation, Managing Emerging Risks to Public Safety. And it has a lot of authors on it, coming from Google DeepMind and even OpenAI. So let's dive in and see. Okay, so here they go into what they call frontier models or advanced AI models. And they say that there's multiple challenges that need to be addressed as the capabilities of these models, dangerous capabilities of these models arise unexpectedly. And firstly, they say here that the standard setting processes to identify appropriate requirements for frontier AI developers will be needed. And secondly, a registration and reporting requirements to provide regulators with visibility into frontier AI development processes. And thirdly, that mechanisms to ensure compliance with safety standards for the development and deployment on frontier models. Interestingly, they also are arguing that we must consider several options to this end, including granting enforcement powers to supervisory authorities and licensure regimes for frontier AI models. So the authors do mention that open sourcing models is very helpful in democratizing the technology and allowing, putting it in the hands of AI developers and keeping everyone accountable, or holding, it's able to improve the public's ability to hold AI developers accountable. But they also say that they believe that open sourcing AI models can be an important public good. However, frontier AI models may need to be handled more restrictively than their small, narrow, or less capable counterparts, just as the cybersecurity researchers embargo security vulnerabilities to give the affected companies time to release a patch. And then in this part of the paper, the authors are showing us instances where models that were made from research institutions or companies that were later open sourced, and the timeline between that. So here the first example was with StyleGAN. StyleGAN was a model that could generate photorealistic human faces. It was developed in 2018, and then it was open sourced in February 2019. It led to basically a website called This Person Does Not Exist, where people could generate images of people's faces, and it led to a proliferation of fake images used later on in that year. And the second, then they have AlphaFold here, AlphaFold 2, which led to OpenFold, but here it was not immediate like with the StyleGAN. It took 2 years to develop, and with GPT-3 it took 7 months. We got Gopher, and then next we got Llama, which came out 1 week after it was announced by Meta. An open sourced version came out a week afterwards. And lastly is ChatGPT, where we got Alpaca 3 months later, and Alpaca was of course developed off of Llama. It was by researchers from Stanford University, and they managed to recreate ChatGPT using less than $60. The model was subsequently taken offline due to concerns about cost and safety, though the code and documentation for replicating the model is available on GitHub. And here they say first, regulators could develop a framework that facilitates AI companies voluntarily disclosing information about frontier AI or foundation models in general. And this could include providing documentation about AI models themselves, as well as the processes involved in developing them. Second, regulators could mandate these or other disclosures and impose reporting requirements on AI companies. And they say the threat of significant administrative fines or civil penalties may provide a strong incentive for companies to ensure compliance with regulatory guidance and best practices. For particularly egregious instances of non-compliance and harm, supervisory authorities could deny market access or consider more severe penalties. So this is just a mode of enforcement for such an approach. The authors do say that just like in other industries, safety critical industries, there is licensing and permissions that are required by authoritative organizations. So similar to in banking or air travel, perhaps in artificial intelligence, you need licenses. We can use licenses for safety critical activities. So here they say licensing is only warranted for the highest risk AI activities where evidence suggests potential risk of large scale harm and other regulatory approaches appear inadequate. Imposing such measures on present day AI systems could potentially create excessive regulatory burdens for AI developers, which are not commensurate with the severity and scales of risk posed. So they do acknowledge that if they introduce the red tape now, like too early, then you could stifle current AI development or even the current ecosystem of developers and open source ecosystem we have now, and could stifle that. Um, but perhaps in the long term, especially for models which are specifically pertaining in high risk AI activities, they could issue licenses for such activities. And I found this particularly interesting. Proposing a risk assessment strategy, so for public safety and global security. So here is an example of a model that would impose a risk. So it's a chatbot that can answer elementary school level questions about biology and some but not all high school level questions. And of course it poses no severe risk to public safety, but then you have here in the third one it says some severe risk to public safety discovered but some safe use cases. A general purpose personal assistant that can help generate new vaccines, but also unless significant safeguards are implemented to predict the genotypes of pathogens that could escape vaccine-induced immunity. So the more general purpose the model gets, it seems it's the more severe the risks and public safety are deemed. And with the last one here, it would be there's an example here showing a general purpose personal assistant that is capable of designing and autonomously ordering the manufacture of novel pathogens and capable of causing a COVID level pandemic. So yeah, the more general purpose, particularly in these tasks of high risk, which in this case is manufacturing pathogens and pandemic COVID level pathogens autonomously, would pose the highest risk in this assessment. And then based on that, based on this pre-assessment, they can then decide whether to deploy the model or not. So it's quite an interesting proposal. So further into the paper, they are posing questions. One of them here is how can regulatory flight be avoided? And they're saying that a regulatory regime for frontier AI could prove counterproductive if it incentivizes AI companies to move their activities to jurisdictions with less onerous rules. One promising approach is to have rules apply to what models people in some jurisdictions can engage with, as people are unlikely to move to different jurisdictions to access different models, and as companies are incentivized to serve them their product. And they do mention the concern on centralization of power in AI development. For example, what they were mentioning earlier with the licensing regime for developers could have the side effect of centralizing power with the company's license to develop the most capable AI systems, which could lead to a centralization of power or an abuse of market dominance. And this is something that many people sort of are concerned about, whereas you have OpenAI also spearheading AI regulation, and of course they are the they are sort of the leaders in this market right now. So it's some argue it's advantageous for them if AI regulation is implemented now versus if we took a bit more time and implemented it more incrementally or later on, and the market can mature or allow other competitors to match up with OpenAI or Google. Okay, so next up we have a paper by Jeremy Howard of Fast AI. The paper or the article is called AI Safety and the Age of Disenlightenment. So, in the abstract, it says proposals for stringent AI model licensing and surveillance will likely be ineffective or counterproductive, concentrating power in uncertain ways and potentially rolling back the societal gains of the Enlightenment. The balance between defending society and empowering society to defend itself is delicate. We should advocate for openness, humility, and broad consultation to develop better responses aligned with our principles and values. Responses that can evolve as we learn more about this technology with the potential to transform society for good or ill. So, right at the beginning of the paper, it says here that some experts are warning of the risk of extinction from AI. So it cites the white paper we just went through. In this article, it is referred to as FAR, and it goes over basically what's said in the paper, which are these two bullet points right here. And goes on further to say that other experts, however, counter that there is so much attention flooded in X risk or existential risk that it takes the air out of more pressing issues and insidiously puts social pressure on researchers focused on other current risks. Historically, large power differentials have led to violence and subservience of whole societies. If we regulate now in a way that increases centralization of power in the name of safety, we risk rolling back the gains made from the age of enlightenment and instead enter the new age of the age of disenlightenment. Instead, we could maintain the enlightenment ideas of openness and trust, such as by supporting open source model development. There's one huge gaping problem which FAR fails to address. Anyone with access to the full version of a powerful AI model has far more power than someone that can only access that model through a restrictive service. But very few people will have access to the full model. If AI does become enormously powerful, then this huge power differential is unsustainable. The regulatory regime being advanced in FAR ultimately leads to a vast amount of power being placed into the entrenched companies by virtue of them having access to the raw models, giving them an information asymmetry against all other actors, including governments seeking to regulate or constrain them. The ideas being advanced in FAR ultimately lead to the frontier of AI becoming inaccessible to everyone who doesn't work at a small number of companies, whose dominance will be enshrined by virtue of these ideas. This is an immensely dangerous and brittle path for society to go down. This attempt to control the use of AI is pointless and ineffective. Not only is proliferation of models impossible to control because digital information is so easy to exfiltrate and copy, it turns out that restrictions on the amount of compute for training models are also impossible to enforce. Gamers around the world can simply install a small piece of software on their computers to opt into helping train these open source models. Howard cites a recent interview of George Hartz, in which shows how developers are making advances in hardware to make it more accessible for everyone.
Okay.
Well, I mean it, because in order to there's a plug over there,
Mhm.
right? You have to be able to plug it in. We're also going to sell the tiny rack, which like what's the most power you can get into your house without arousing suspicion? And one of the answers is an electric car charger.
Wait, where does the rack go?
Your garage.
Interesting. The car charger.
A wall outlet is about 1,500 watts. A car charger is about 10,000 watts.
What is the most amount of power you can get your hands on without arousing suspicion?
That's right.
George Hotz.
When the self-described pioneer of the AI safety movement, Ilyitsa Yudkowsky, proposed airstrikes on unauthorized data centers and the threat of nuclear war to ensure compliance from states failing to control unauthorized use of computation capability, many were shocked. But bombing data centers and global surveillance of all computers is the only way to ensure the kind of safety compliance that FAR proposes. Just as thinkers of the Enlightenment asked difficult questions like, what if everyone got an education? What if everyone got the vote? We should ask the question, what if everyone got access to the full power of AI? Models are just software. They are mathematical functions embodied as code. When we copy software, we don't usually call it proliferation as FAR does. That word is generally associated with nuclear weapons. When we copy software, we call it installing or deploying or sharing. Howard goes on to cite a response by Stanford and Princeton's top AI policy groups to the US government's request for comment on AI accountability. It states that for foundation models to advance the public interest, their development and deployment should ensure transparency, support innovation, distribute power, and minimize harm. We argue open source foundation models can achieve all four of these objectives, in part due to inherent merits of open source: pro-transparency, pro-innovation, anti-concentration. It's far too early for us to pick a single path and decide to hurtle down it with unstoppable momentum. Instead, we need to be able, as a society, to respond rapidly and in an informed way to new opportunities and threats as they arise. Howard then goes on to cite Aidan Gomez, co-creator of the Transformers neural network. Aidan Gomez says, there are real risks with this technology. There are reasons to fear this technology, and who use it and how. So to spend all of our time debating whether our species is going to go extinct because of a takeover by super intelligent AGI is an absurd use of our time and the public's mind space. I would really hope that the public knows some of the more fantastical stories about risk are unfounded. They are distractions from the conversations that should be going on. With centralization, we will create haves and have-nots, and the haves will have access to a technology that makes them vastly more powerful than everyone else. When massive power and wealth differentials are created, they are captured by those that most want power and wealth. And history tells us violence is the only way such differentials can be undone. Connor Leahy of Eleuther AI responded to Jeremy Howard's article and said, unfortunately, my opinion is that the world has an offense-defense asymmetry, and one maniac with a nuke and one good guy with a nuke results in a smoldering crater, not peace. And further went on to say, and in this case it's more like giving every single maniac in the world a nuke rather than just one of them. If you play a prisoner's dilemma with a large enough population, where a single defection ruins everything, you're in for a bad time. And it's even worse than that. This is all presupposing we even solve the control problem, and the first AGI doesn't just immediately blow up whoever built it. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and have a good day.